Okay, this is going to be a very brief review of sections 1 and 2 for chapter 18. With regards to section 1, I simply expect you to be reading with care. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reviewing information. Just a couple of elements, though, that I want you to pay attention to. If you look on page 522, second full paragraph on 522, note Rook's study in 87, noting that having friends offer support reduces high stress. This is something that we actually talked about with regards to stress earlier. The whole business with regards to, prior to that, why you need friends, with regards to anxiety and companionship, comparing experiences, reducing uncertainty. Really briefly, just a note on comparing experiences. You guys see this sort of thing all the time. Whenever you experience something new or something unknown, you'll then get together with others and say, so what did you think? What was going on there? What were your thoughts on that? Or this is what I was experiencing. And you may not say it specifically in those terms, but that is the effect that you're ultimately reaching for. Page 522, talking about how you choose friends. No physical proximity determines almost more than anything whether you end up becoming friends with someone. It'll be interesting to see in this increased period of online living to see if that actually starts to have an impact on that. With regard to reward value, note the vocabulary, as well as physical appearance. There's a very interesting bit there with regards to physical appearance. Not only does this impact how we choose friends, and in some cases how we even choose spouses, but there's some fascinating studies out there that shows that spouses actually start to look like one another over time. And I don't have, unfortunately, any specific photographic comparisons to show you, but it is curious how that tends to be a case. Approval, similarity, but note also complementarity with regards to friendships and spousal relationships. This is a case where people are not necessarily identical. As we've kind of described in the past, when it comes to my relationship with my wife, we're definitely not alike. And in terms of our parenting styles, we complement one another. My wife tends to be very caring and nurturing. I tend to be somewhat grouchy and aloof. But there are times when being grouchy and aloof serves you well as a parent, just as certainly times being caring and considerate and affectionate are also helpful. Now, moving on to section 2, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this. I want you to skip ahead to first impressions with regards to the forming of relationships and the notion that first impressions tend to have a significant impact on whether you form a relationship with this person or not. This is certainly true. Has gone on, in any number of different relationships, and that affects you. First impressions with friends, first impression with dates, first impressions with job interviews. This is part of the reason with job interviews or even college applications, you want to present yourself in the most favorable light. It may not necessarily be who you actually are and how you actually present yourself, but first impressions matter because they last for an extended period of time. This gets back to that notion of what I've called the priming effect, or what the book here calls, if you look at the vocabulary on 528, the primacy effect. Tendency to form opinions about others based on first impressions. We actually do that with lots of different things, not just with first impressions with others. If you remember that experiment with the car, you were witnessing a car accident, and then there was a narrative associated with it. There were particular verbs associated with that. There was bumped, crashed, smashed, touched. I can't remember all the verbs, but they were along those lines. And then you were told to estimate how fast the car was going, when in fact everyone was seeing the exact same video. Those words primed the person's response. Another example of priming is if you or your family buy a new car, or it could be an old car, it doesn't matter, it's a sort of car you haven't had before, and then every time you're out in public you start to see that car much more often. Has there really been many more instances of those cars? No, you're simply primed to notice them. This is certainly true in sociology, in social psychology. When we're talking about the initial relationship we have with others, first impressions really matter. I don't know how true this is for all of you. I do know that in 17 years here, I've found it pretty consistent that the underclassmen tend to be terrified of me. And I think part of the reason for that is I am not obviously the friendliest person on the face of the earth. I don't go out of my way to make people feel comfortable. Unlike someone, say for instance, like Mrs. Sarazola or Mrs. Axel, who will certainly go out of their way to make others feel comfortable. I tend not to do that, and so as a result, people go, "No, Mr. Powers, man, scary figure, don't want to be around him." My general experience, though, is that once you had me as a teacher, I'm not as scary. But the first impression, it lingers, and it lingers for an extended period of time. So you need to be aware of that in all instances when you're forming relationships. First impressions can also contribute to the concept of schemas. What's the box that we're going to fit people into? Okay, man, this guy's talking about politics a lot, or this guy's talking about Trump a lot. He must be a mega man, or this guy talks about how much Trump is a bad person. This guy might be a Democrat, whatever. Trump is just one potential example of how we can put people in boxes. When we're talking about putting people in boxes with regards to social psychology, we're talking about schemas. Now, note stereotype. I want you to be careful with this. They are talking, for once, about the sort of thing that is common in the culture. We tend to make stereotypes based on people's religion, based on their gender, based on their race, based potentially on their political affiliation, maybe even the job that they happen to be into. Stereotype doesn't state necessarily that it is right or wrong, it is simply stating a reality. But you do need to be cautious, and hopefully you've talked about this in social justice. You've got to be careful with stereotypes, because weirdly, in many instances, they can serve as a rule of thumb. Remember heuristics? They can serve as a rule of thumb for pigeonholing people, for trying to see if they are of a given character or not. For instance, the common stereotype that Asians are all excellent students. Now, if you look at test scores, broadly speaking, this is true. Now, we then tend to, with stereotypes, say it's a racial thing. Well, it's actually not a racial thing. It's a cultural thing. The distinction is fine, but it's important. It's important to consider that it's not so much folks from the East of an Asian racial descent, and I hate that term racial. It's not their specifically racial descent that may make them good students. It's more the tendency in the culture in which Asian children are often raised. And academics are proven to be exceptionally important in those cultures. So it's a cultural issue, not a racial issue. You indulge in the stereotype. Oh, he's Asian, she's Asian, must be a good student. In general betting circles, this might be true. Specifically, is it always going to be true? Absolutely not. You cannot point at a particular person and say, oh, because they're Asian, they must be a good student. You don't know that. You have to deal with the individual. Now, here's the real key that I wanted to get into, and it gets to the end of the reading with regards to attribution theory. This is a key component of social psychology. If you take a look at the definition, a collection of principles based on our explanations of the causes of events and other people's behaviors. This stuff is fascinating, and it's something that you're going to see that you do with yourself and that you see others do. I want you to go ahead and look at page 431. I'm going to read the definition of fundamental attribution error. An inclination to over-attribute others' behaviors to internal causes, what are called dispositional factors, and discount the situational factors contributing to their behavior. To oversimplify, fundamental attribution error says this. If someone else does something that you disapprove of, you will tend to attribute their behavior to something that's in their disposition. It is inside them. Or they bumped into me because they're a mean person. Okay, rather than viewing it as a situational condition, as in they bumped into me because they tripped, or they bumped into me because they didn't happen to be looking when they were walking, or whatever the case may be. Fundamentally, when someone does something we don't approve, we're going to say that's because of their personality. It's because of something that's inside of them, not because of the situation surrounding them. And that's a fundamental error. We do it regularly, and it ain't always correct. Another manifestation of this fundamental attribution error, you take a look at actor-observer bias. Let's go ahead and read this one as well. The tendency to attribute one's own behavior to outside causes and attribute the behavior of others to internal causes. So, when someone else does something wrong, You blame it on their personality. When you do something wrong, you say, oh, it was because of the situation. Normally, I'm not that way. Okay, and again, we do this a lot. When other people are being jerks to us, we're going to say that's because they've got a bad personality. When we're a jerk, or when we do something wrong, it's like, oh, there was a condition involved. I didn't get enough sleep. My mom was arguing with me. My dog ate my homework. I didn't get rationalizing, right? We tend to rationalize our own behavior, say it was situational in its condition, but we don't cut other people the same break. Now, again, this is a generalization. You're going to be much more patient with your friends. Some of us can be more engaging in this fundamental attribution error than others, but make no mistake, as a group, we all tend to do this to some extent. And take a look at self-serving bias. A tendency to claim success is due to our efforts, while failure is due to circumstances beyond our control. In short, this is kind of a variation on actor-observer, but it's specifically a self-serving bias. You do something, and you're successful at it. That is because of your personality, because of effort you put into it. It's your claim to success. You get to own this. I did this. I'm so good. But then if you do the very same thing and fail at it, you're not going to say it wasn't because of my tendency to not practice, or I wasn't paying attention, or anything like that. Again, we're going to search for a source of blame that is outside of us. We want to own our successes for ourselves. We want to place our blame on things outside of us. These are fundamental components. I talk about fundamental attribution error. These are fundamental components of social psychology. AP students, if and when you're going to be taking this test, look out for this sort of stuff. Questions in regards to social psychology, they're going to look at this stuff a great deal. Okay, then the last part of the reading focuses strictly on nonverbal communication. We've already talked about this to some extent. I'm simply going to have you look at this at your own leisure. And that pretty much will do it. For the meet tomorrow, I'm going to try again to have some type of in-class quiz. I'm having varying levels of success with this, but that's my goal. Be on the lookout for that. And it'll be on anything, these first two sections, not just what I've covered in this video. And finally, you can count on sections 3 and 4. We'll be going over that next Monday. But that'll be it for this particular presentation. See you tomorrow.